Yo, what's going on, golf fans? It's your boy, Gsluke, here with our Round 4 live stream for the Farmers Insurance Open. Going to get you ready for all of your DFS and prop exposure with a breakdown of weather report. We'll go through some ownership to give you an idea of where the rest of the field is going with their lineups. We'll talk through some strategy, shots gained metrics, also some prize picks and underdog props that I like towards the end, even some matchups on the sports books as well. But anything on top of that you're curious about, that can be player deep dives, anything strategy-based, any bets that you want my opinion on either, feel free to go ahead and hit me up in the live chat with those. We got Busboy in the chat, Justin Rose at 71.5 again. He says, yeah, we'll talk about that on the prop side towards the second half of this live stream, about a half an hour in. But hopefully you're having a fantastic day so far. It's Saturday. We've got one more day left of this golf tournament. And although Justin Rose is all but surely going to win, we've got GPPs to take down. We've got ourselves some props to add to the bankroll as well. So still a busy day for all of us golf bettors, but it just cooked up a steak, so we got a full belly cooking up on that side of things, but hopefully we can cook up a little bit of some Sunday exposure as well. So only thing I need you guys to do before we hop on in is to go ahead and smash that like button, and let's go ahead and get this thing started. And it's going to be the same situation as round 3 when it comes to the golf courses, only the South course that's in play. So none of the North versus South course stuff like we had for round 2. And we do have placement points in play because it's Sunday. And with Justin Rose with a 6-shot lead, he's going to be over 50% owned in a lot of GPP contests, but that's because of the points that he's getting for starting in first place. So we'll really hammer home on that later on would be talk about lineup construction. Even when we go through the ownership, that's going to be a talking point. But in general, these guys starting in the top 10 to top 20 are a lot higher owned than some of their peers. So traditional Sunday slate from that sort of format. But because the scoring at this event is harder than most, I do want to point that out. It played about even par for today, even with a relatively easy moving day setup. The placement points matter a little bit more than they do at Birdie Fest, whereas the last couple events, scoring was -2, -3 at some of those events. You need the winner, especially take down the big 150 max style of contests, but you really needed 2, maybe 3 guys that finished in the top 5 to have the absolute nuts. The other 3 to 4 players could have came from the middle of the board, even the very start of tee times, guys that were at the very last positions heading into the final round, because there were -6 to -8 rounds at those golf courses. Not to say that you can't shoot someone like -5 or -6 here. If you have a perfect ball striking day, I think you can do that. But this golf course has notoriously difficult pins on a Sunday, so it makes those placement points a little bit more valuable. And I think that's why Justin Rose is going to get a little bit of extra steam from that ownership angle, but it is relatively warranted because of that situation. But on the weather standpoint, there's a little bit of a gust of wind that comes in about midday. I would say the big change from the first couple of days to Sunday is that it looks a little bit cooler with your temperatures. It does get to about 70 about 11 a.m., but then in the afternoon, rather than closer to 75, 76 degrees like it was today, this HRRR model that we have up here has it closer to 65 to 64 degrees in the afternoon. So not a cool day. It's not like it's in the 50s, or it's going to be in the 30s down here in South Florida tonight, which I'm actually looking forward to. I'm from the Northeast originally, from Pittsburgh, so I'm more than used to that sort of weather. A lot of my friends and family down here aren't, so that's going to be interesting for them. But it's going to be a pretty mild day, 60s over there, which could make it even slightly harder. Adding some extra emphasis with that placement point perspective. So we're going to add on top of that when we actually build a lineup or 2 together. I would say rather than just 1 to 3 guys towards the top end of the board in your lineups, you probably want at least 2 to 4 in this kind of scenario. That's how it changes based on the conditions that we're expecting. If we don't have the pin locations yet, I'm just basing that on what we have typically seen at this event over the past few years. They'll make the hole 3 a lot shorter. That'll be one of the few easier holes that they have. But there are some pin locations that they haven't used to this stage that are some of the hardest that we have on the entire PGA Tour schedule. So looking forward to that. Should be a lot of fun to watch from the entertainment standpoint. Even if a Rose isn't being challenged, the rest of the top 5, the top 10 is going to have a lot of volatility, I would imagine. So let's go through the ownership now that we have an idea of what to expect strategy-wise and with that weather. And we're going to go through the top 10 in the ownership this time around. And because it is Sunday, there's a lot of condensing with the ownership that happens. Justin Rose, for example, is over that 50% mark, like I was mentioning. But guys like a Joel Damon, that's in the 7K range, is your second highest owned player at over the 30% mark. So we'll point out some of those players, people to keep an eye on. It's not like you can avoid all all of these guys because they're starting at the top end of the board. They're the players that have the best chance to finish in that top 5, top 10. It's just that when you're using these sort of players, you're going to have to be careful from the ownership angle. You're going to have, even though we are prioritizing those placement points, you're still going to have a couple guys in there that are giving you sub 5, sub 10% ownership and leverage in your lineups, in particular, if you're in some of the large field GPPs for tomorrow. So that's why we'll focus on that. I just want to catch up on chat, say hi to anyone that's down there. What's going on, Jay, the football kid? He said, today killed you. Hopefully tomorrow's better. Yeah, you're not going to win every day, man. So if you had a down day today, then hopefully tomorrow is better for you. It's the same way with everyone out there. He said, I've been tailing the Patreon every day. We're due for a big day tomorrow. Yeah, today was solid. I'm not going to complain about a break-even day today. But yeah, we're due for a big spike day. Hopefully tomorrow can be that for us. He said, locking rows, yay or nay? I mean, that's a personal decision. I can't make that for you. I can just tell you what I'm doing, which we'll go through here in a few minutes. But yeah, you can make an argument either way at somebody that's about 50% owned. And I don't think it's just as easy as do you lock him or not. You have to question how many lineups you have, the kind of contest that you're entering before you make that kind of decision. So we're going to go through a lot more detail than just yay or nay on that. What's going on, Hermit Money? Yeah, that seems to even hook killed you. Yeah, it didn't really kill me because the other side missed. Novak went over by 0.5 anyways, but I feel you, man. That's prop Ben for you. Sometimes it's the 0.5 hooks that help you out. Sometimes they work against you. You gotta, whenever they work out for you, right? Nobody goes, oh, wow, we got lucky there and had a good day. People only remember when it goes against them. And I guess if I would give you any life advice, it would be to try and have a little bit more gratitude towards when things go your way. Because if not, you're going to be pretty miserable with your existence. So I try and do that as much as possible. I even try and point that out on the Patreon page in our content when we have stuff that goes our way, because it's just as good as the bad. And hey, I think you should be focusing on the good more than the bad anyways, because that's the way to live a happier life to begin with. But let's go through this ownership at the top just to get an idea where the rest of the field is going, because this is the biggest edge that we have with PGA DFS guys. We know that it's hard to predict the most chaotic sports that we have with all the big major sports for DFS. So ahead of time, if you're just going to play all the mega chalk up here and you think that all the top 5, top 10 is just going to remain the top 5, top 10, then you're going to get absolutely crushed in your Sunday exposure. This is a hard golf course. You're going to get a lot of these players that are moving backwards, and the players that are in the 10th to 20th position are, in my opinion, much better placed than some of the guys that you're seeing right here. And it's not just because of the fact that they're lower owned, but they also have to be more aggressive to actually get into that contention picture. And birdie or better production, actually posting birdie streaks, that kind of production is still the vast majority of where your points are going to come from tomorrow. So that's why I like those guys a little bit more too. And you get them at that slightly lower ownership number. And there's some pretty quality plays that we can find down there too. But these guys can't be completely left out of contention. A Rosie at about 56.4%. If you're a 150 max player like myself, you could match the field. You could play them in half of your lineups if you wanted to, and then run half of them without them. You could lock them in all 150. You could play them in 0 lineups, and it would make sense. Because the placement points matter, his projection is by far the best that we have on the slate. So that's, of course, the argument for playing him. But because it is such a difficult course and he has a 6-shot lead, he could conceivably shoot +3 and still win this golf tournament. And shooting +3 and then getting the placement points might not be enough to be the optimal play. And a lot of that has to do with his price tag. If this was a Justin Rose that was $7,500 in this position, we'd be having a different conversation. He'd be a borderline lock almost no matter what. Because he's $9,200 and there's some opportunity cost with using somebody at that kind of a price tag, it makes the conversation a little bit more interesting. And to me, it's a coin flip. I'll tell you guys what I'm doing with my exposure. I'm entering 150 lineups for Sunday, just like I did the last couple days. And I'm going to have about 70 to 80 that have a Justin Rose. And then the rest of my portfolio is obviously going to be fading Justin Rose. So kind of punting that position because I don't really have a massive take on it. I think that he's higher owned than he should be. He's obviously pretty expensive too. Those are both negatives. But when we look at the ball striking stats, it's warranted. It's like he's playing like Scotty Scheffler this week. He gained ball striking today, but lost in the 2 short game categories. It's hard to want to write somebody like that off. So if you have conviction in either direction, to get back to the question that we had in chat, I'm okay with fading him or just going 100% in either direction, but you don't have to if you have enough lineups. If you're only entering like 4 or 5, you should commit in either direction. Even if you only have like 20 lineups, you should be committing to him in either direction, not playing 50%. I'd say where you can start thinking about going 50-50 is if you're in like the 40 to 50 plus lineup range where you have a big enough portfolio to actually cover both sides of that outcome. But if you only have 3 or 4 lineups and you have like 2 with them and then 2 without them on there, you could conceivably still actually hit the nuts with one of those lineups, but you're really cornering yourself in that scenario. You could have a lineup without Justin Rose that has the absolute nuts elsewhere, then get screwed that way. That's why I'm more comfortable doing that if you have over that 50 lineup mark. So that's the Justin Rose talk. It's whether to take him or not is, I think, a very interesting conversation. And I went back and forth on it quite a bit. And like I said, I'm using them in about half my builds there, which actually is a little bit below the field at that 56.4% mark that I'm projecting for. Joel Damon is by far the next highest owned player on the site at 31.6%. And the reason why I say that is that he's a 7K range player, and you've got other guys in the 7K range that are like 2 to 3% owned. So he's 10 times higher owned than some of those players. He is in second place by quite a wide margin of 2 strokes down to third place. And that has all to do with why he's getting all of that steam. But this is the Joel Damon that has been extremely inconsistent over the last year or so. Has had a lot of up and downs, a lot of missed cuts on the PGA Tour. Doesn't even have full-time status at this point. If you're going to play a 60 to a 70% owned exposure Joel Damon in your lineups, I just don't have the stones to do that sort of thing. I think that could be a mistake, or at least a highly volatile play that you'd be making if you were doing so. And I'd say, like, if you were using a Damon, like maybe you'd want to be a little bit less aggressive with your leverage, go to like 1.5x and only use them in like half of your lineups and maybe not get the full 2x like a lot of people usually call for. And I actually think the better place to fade somebody like a Joel Damon tomorrow. So though I'll have some lineups with Justin Rose and some of them without him, I am making a few more ownership fades towards the top end of the board here on guys that weren't playing as solid of golf. Siwoo Kim at the 10K range, I've also got him at about 30%. He's been at about 30% the last 3 rounds. So that's pretty much spot in line with where he has been for the baseline. Max McGreevy at $8,600. He's, free shots off of second place. And I think when we're looking at the placement points, like a lot of these guys aren't going to win. We're not looking at like, who could conceivably win this golf tournament for placement points. We're looking for those top 5 to top 10 points. And somebody starting at -12 is well within that kind of conversation. Unfortunately, though, Max McGreevy is also going to be by far the highest owned player that we have in the 8K range. So there's just a cost involved with getting to all these guys. The chalk in the 6K range is a Rio Hisatune at -13. Crazy to see somebody in the 6K range that is over 20%, but I've got him at 21.6%. Steven Yeager, after his nuclear round with the course history, by the way, was one of my best plays. One of the plays that really carried my exposure today in Showdown was a Steven Yeager. A lot of the course history guys did it for me. It was your Harris English with a bogey-free round. Steven Yeager -7, almost had the course record for the week on if he could have birdied his final hole, would have shot -8 and would have edged out, I think, Seamus Power, who shot -7. Either way, it was impressive, but now he's chalk, he's over 20%, and he's also more expensive than he's been the entire week. So if you didn't like Steven Yeager before, I don't know how you would like him now that he's that much higher owned. And I guess the answer to that is the casuals see him starting at -11 to think that he's no matter what going to finish top 3, top 5. Just like a Joel Damon, Steven Yeager has been struggling mightily over the last 6 months to a year. So those kind of, cheap players that are in that 20 to 30% range are prime fade candidates for me, especially when they're coming in with some sketchy form like you have with those two. A Matt McNeely next at $9,700. He's at -11, solid starting position, but he's getting the ownership because he's in the 9K range. Same thing with Decky at -10. They're starting in a decent spot, but there are players towards the top that are a little bit better from that department. So those are the ones that are closer to 30%, like a Siwoo. Seamus Power, another piece of that 7K chalk, but a little bit more mild compared to a Joel Damon. So not to say that I'm playing a Seamus Power per se, but a piece of chalk like Seamus Power that's closer to 20% ownership as opposed to 30% in the 7K range is a little bit easier to stomach. But in most cases, these guys like Seamus Power that are 4 to 5 times higher owned than some of their peers are almost automatic cross-off spots for me, because if I'm going to play somebody with the placement points, it's like your Rose that's actually starting in first, is a legit golfer, and that's won at this golf course before. Or it's your Siwoo Kims that's actually hitting the ball really well and rebounded quite nicely over his last 4 to 5 holes. He saved me on my betting exposure today. I had a Siwoo Kim under, also an under on Chris Goddard up at 71.5 strokes. Siwoo Kim made a double bogey on hole number 12, which I thought I was dead at that point. I actually turned off the golf. and started just working on the spreadsheets for the next day. And I come to check on his score because I had to update his projections and his starting point for the final rounds. And I see that he birdied, I think, 4 of his last 6 holes or something like that. So shout out to Sibu Kim. In the past, maybe 2 to 3 years ago, he would have quit in that kind of a situation. But yeah, I like these guys a little bit more that actually showed something with the ball striking today and that are legit top tier players, as opposed to guys that are a little bit sketchy and are just having a little bit of a spike week so far. And it's hard to close these things out. Joel Damon, because of the lack of status, he's probably going to be a little bit more nervous than most tomorrow, even though he doesn't have a good chance to win. Same thing with guys like a Seamus Power. He's yet to be in this position for a very long time, to be in the top 3 or top 5 heading into a final round, at least from what I can remember at a big time event over the last year or so. These guys that haven't been there in the last 3 to 4 months are players that I think you could also look to as potential fade candidates. But that's the top 10 of the ownership. The importance on the ownership doesn't stop there. And a lot of this 10 to 20 range, what is blacked out down here towards the bottom, you're going to see players that are in that 6 and 7K range that are also near the top end of the board that are in a lot of cases really good fade candidates. So if you guys want to see this spreadsheet with all my ownership projections for Sunday, the most important part of having a good Sunday process is knowing where the rest of the field is going. They make sure to check out my Patreon page for that. You're not going to find a bigger sweaty tryhard in the industry that really dives into the ownership like I do. I compare ownership from, what I project to what actually happens for every single slate so that I can learn from it and improve my algorithm as time goes on. And I've been doing this for 6 years professionally at this point. It's gone a lot better than when I first started. And in my opinion, it's by far the best stuff that you can find in the industry. And the ownership projections, the R squared value backs that up over the last 6 months on my channel. And we also have all the player pool and projections over there too, not just the ownership that we just went through, but also a projected fantasy points for the entire field. That includes the placement points. I feel like there's a few DFS sites out there that don't properly include the placement points. I've done a lot of study in it. It actually comes down to the betting odds with how I incorporate those projected fantasy points. So that's another edge that you have with joining my Patreon page, and you get my entire player pool. And that's not to say that you have to play my entire player pool. In fact, I encourage you to make your own plays for your round 4 process, but it's good to have the perspective of somebody that's a professional, somebody that's 150 max player like myself, so that you can bounce ideas off of that. And, maybe you need to find a few 6K range guys to round off your player pool. Not a bad idea to see who I'm playing down there and maybe take 1 or 2 of those players and mix them in yourself. Again, it doesn't have to be your exact process, what you're modeling off of my player pool, but it's great information to have at the same time. And not only do I tell you guys who I'm playing in my lineups, but I give you guys the rhyme and reasoning behind it as well. That includes whether guys are ball striking poppers. These are shots gained categories with the top 2. Short game regression candidates are guys that didn't get a whole lot out of their game chipping or putting, and that might be able to do a little bit better the next day. You got high upside players, guys that make a lot of birdies. This isn't the best golf course for that, but it's still a factor, as birdie production, like I mentioned earlier, is still the vast majority of the fantasy points that you're going to score for tomorrow. You got course history, guys that have played well. Torrey Pines, aka a Tony Finau. Tony Finau, by the way, in his 12 starts has like 10 top 25 finishes, just next level course history. Those sort of guys worth a few looks. You can look at good POA putters. That's the type of grass that we have this week. The important part here, though, is that you have a process for getting to your plays. By the way, the bottom one down here, you guys can see is the placement point tag. That's one exclusively for Sundays where we have the placement points to factor in. But you don't just have to guess why I'm using certain players. You're going to get the information to go out there and check it out yourself. So whether you're following my Patreon page and you're using those to get that information, or you're incorporating this sort of process in yourself, just have a rhyme and reason for every play that you're getting to. You're going to get some of those nasty plays that are causing you problems out of your process, and you'll be a much better player for it in the long term. So that's it for the ownership angle. Now we're going to go through some shots gained metrics from today and any player pool deep dives that you guys have for me in the chat. So if there's any players that you're curious about on how they were playing today and maybe how it translates heading into round number 4, feel free to go ahead and let me know in the live chat. We're going to start off with just the baseline for guys on round number 3, who's trending well in general heading into tomorrow. And then afterwards, we're going to go through anyone that you guys are curious about in general. But let me catch up on chat, say hi to anyone that's in there. And then we're going to do all this deep dives like I'm saying. Let's see where we leave off. Yeah, you said you've been up a lot this season already. You've gone really lucky. Exactly, man. So you want to look at the positive side where you can. That's what I try and do myself as well. It's easy to get frustrated when things don't go your way. But you got to enjoy it when things do go your way. And I've had a lot of luck in this industry as well, including takedowns, last second collapses from players that have gone me to first place in GPPs before. That kind of stuff is just as awesome as when it's frustrating the other way. You took the better bet. You downloaded the app last second and it saved your day. Same thing here. Those two going under was pretty sweet for me. So there you go. And yeah, man, Siwu, that little rebound towards the end was the big bright spot from today's action. You're stuck between Nikolai and Finau for tomorrow. Who would I choose? I'm not really the biggest fan of like two players. Who am I choosing? Because what if I don't like either of them for my process tomorrow? I'll give you some pros and cons to either player. We could do that when we go through the deep dive section, but I don't know if I necessarily want to corner myself in and choose one of those two, right? He said, you're going to fade in single entry for what it's worth. Ownership will be even higher. You're talking about with Rosie, for sure, ownership will be higher in the single entries. That's how it works with chalk in general. All the chalk that you're seeing there, it's not just Rose, by the way, but that's going to happen with. It's going to happen with the Damon. It's going to happen with the Power, his Satuni. Literally every player in that top 10 will probably be on a percentage basis, an extra 30% ownership in the single entries. And the guys around them, the players, for example, that stunk it up today and are at the bottom end of the leaderboard, those guys are probably going to be 30, maybe even 50% lower owned in a lot of cases. So yeah, it's nuance between what we have in single entries and GPPs. Just know that the ownership we were going through before is for the large field GPPs. So if you need to make any adjustments to that, you do it through that single entry lens. And yeah, I knew who you were talking about. No worries on that. If Rose shoots -3, is that enough? 100%. He shoots -3, it's a guarantee that he's optimal. There's no way in hell that he wouldn't be. He said he always struggled on what the break point for the optimal would be. You could say, Sites, that he could shoot even par and he'd be optimal if he wins this event because the scoring's probably going to be about an even par average. I think where it starts to get interesting is when he shoots +1 or +2 and he wins this event. So -3, you'd be sitting pretty with the Justin Rose in lineups, but yeah, anything over par, and he might not win if he shoots over par. It could get a little interesting if one of those guys goes low, but I think he could shoot +3 and win this event with some of the guys that are behind him. So it's going to be an interesting one, I think. With his first place points guaranteed, he is a lock. I don't know if I'd say he's a pure lock, but I see the reasoning for playing him. That's why I'm going 50% myself. And it's not a lock because he could make 2 birdies on the day. That's about 11 points there. Some birdies, some bogeys, end up shooting over par and win, and then not make it to the optimal lineup. And we already mentioned why before. If he was $7,500, you'd be right. He'd be a lock for the optimal lineup if he wins. But because he's $9,200, that's a lot of salary that you could be using elsewhere for another stud, rather than using a 6K range player, get an 8K range player, rather than making that sort of a pivot. That's why it's not quite as straightforward as that, in my opinion. You said you meant DFS? Oh, I got you. Okay. So you're saying well, I knew what you meant, man. I know what you're saying for Showdown. I don't like picking players for people. It still stands, man, right? I'm not somebody that likes just choosing people's lineups for them. I'll give you some deep dives on both of those, but I'm not going to build your lineup for you, man. Let's go through the shots gained metrics together, though. So we're going to go through who played well for round 3. Ball striking is off the tee plus approach play, and that's how a player is swinging the golf club. And that's going to be the most consistent part of golf from day to day. Players, after a bad round, will go to the range and work on their game. They'll get it ironed out before the next round because that matters. And it's something that is not questionable. Like, this has been an established thing on tour for decades at this point, and the data backs it up as well. So guys like a Justin Rose here that gained 4.3 strokes ball striking, you have a hard time thinking that they're going to regress too much for tomorrow. So that's another data point, by the way, that makes it hard to want to fade a Justin Rose. So just number 1 in the field, it's hard to bet against him at this point. Even if he is closer to a neutral, only gains like 1.5, 2 strokes ball striking. That gives him 1.5 to 2 strokes to the field to work with in the short game categories. And let's not say that like Rose is terrible in the short game categories. He's not. He's above average in all 4 categories on the PGA Tour. That's why I think he's such a rock solid play for tomorrow. But there's a Chris Goddard up down here next at over 3 shots gained ball striking. You can see he lost with the short game stats again. That's been 2 days in a row, by the way, where he's been one of the top ball strikers, but has lost with the short game. If he can find a way to marry up the ball striking with even just 1 to 2 shots gained to the short game categories, he could be in for, a slate changing sort of score for tomorrow. So I'm going to be going right back to Chris Goddard up. Got a Tony Finau next. So with your question, by the way, man, look at that. Tony Finau number 3 in shots gained ball striking. I'd have a hard time thinking that Nico Højgaard's going to outmatch a Tony Finau in this situation. And here's the reason why. It's not just the shots gained metrics. Tony Finau is like the #1 course history guy in history around a Torrey Pines course. So yeah, I don't like picking one of the two, but that's a lot of really positive points that he could give to a Tony Finau there. He also lost strokes in the 2 short game category, so that's not a massive positive. And just because we're on the topic, I'll look at Nikolai's stats. Nikolai gained ball striking, so that's solid, and lost in the short game categories. So he's got to be a 7 or even an 8 out of 10 as well. Maybe closer to a 7 because it was only 0.7 strokes ball striking that he was able to muster up today. But those 2 players that you're looking at for Sunday are both solid options. I don't think you could go wrong with either of them. Nico, by the way, today, he had like no birdies. I mean, just to go back to the scorecard on him, he had like no birdies through 15 holes, and he birdied the really hard 16th hole, the long back left pin location par 3. Then he didn't do anything else. He did make the 1 bogey at 7, so it was a very boring scorecard. He's normally a high birdie percentage player, somebody with more volatility on his scorecards. So you would have to think that that means he's due for some regression tomorrow. And by regression, that could be a lot of bogeys, or it could be a lot of birdies and bogeys that he's posting, which would be good for showdown purposes. So I like both of those plays, if I had to say. Is it worth it to play the bottom of the board tomorrow, guys, with the first tee time that have no shot? For sure, James. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, so you might have hopped out of here for a few minutes as we went through that. For sure, because you still need leverage for the large field GPPs. And maybe it's not as much of a priority to do that. It's been like a single entry or a cash lineup, but in a large field 150 max where you don't want to duplicate yourself a bunch of different times, having someone, it doesn't have to be a super early starter, by the way. I would include even the middle tee times with this, the guys that are closer to like T35, that range. Those players maybe aren't going to finish top 5. They don't have that same sort of equity. But if you shoot a -3 tomorrow, that's still going to get you to the optimal lineup. Without an even par scoring average, that's probably even going to be over par. I think probably a half stroke over par is a better scoring average for tomorrow. But a -3 rounds would be on the borderline of being optimal. Anything -4 or better is almost a shoe-in to be that sort of performance. So you can scatter shot that. I would go lower percentages. I wouldn't be going super high exposure on anyone at that portion of the board, but it's still usable. And anytime you take a look like at the $5 GPP on Sunday or like the big $25 contest, the winner always has somebody that came out of nowhere. It's usually only like one player. You're not going to see a whole bunch of guys at that portion of the board going off unless there's a really big weather edge that we have for that slate. But it's 3 sums off of both tees here. So there's not really a weather edge to attack from that perspective. So yeah, I'd say you can use them, but don't go too crazy on it. Would be my main piece of advice. Let's go through a few other ball strikers you had on there outside of a Tony Finau. Haotong Li, he also hit the ball well. That's been multiple days in a row at this point where he's been one of the best ball strikers in the field. Denny McCarthy, too, he's been pretty solid with the ball striking when we've seen him at the South course. He plays well at these hard, grinded-out golf courses, so that's not a massive surprise. Course history, Harris English, he was ball striking it heading into today and wasn't getting any putts to drop. So it's good to see that he went from losing with the short game categories to actually gaining 2 strokes putting today. That was exactly what we were hoping for and is a perfect example of the short game regression working out for us. You got a Dan Brown next. He gained 2.5 strokes on approach. That's where most of that ball striking came in. But that approach play was also mostly from one shot that he hit today, where he had a near albatross at hole number 9, which led to an eagle. You had Jaeger, who also had a really good day across the board. The 4 shots gained putting, though, is something that's going to be pretty hard to repeat in back-to-back days. A Jason Day, a Brooks Koepka also had pretty solid rounds. A Day, especially with his approach play, he gained over 3 strokes into the positive with his irons. If I had to pick a ball striking category between off the tee and approach, it would for sure be approach play, as that's the one that's been a little bit more predictive out of those two. But off the tee play, especially at a hard course like this with a deep rough, is something that you don't want to be ignoring either. That's why we're looking at this ball striking combined. But a guys like a Rio, a Davis Thompson towards the top, the guys that are rounding off this top 10 in the ball striking list are all worthy of a little bit of extra attention. And I will say, even though we're not spending as much time as this like 5 to 10 range or even the 10 to 15 range for this category as we did on the top 5, the top 5 are going to also get more attention from the masses. So they're going to have some higher ownership in some cases, in particular, like your Chris Goddard ups, that's towards the top end of the board. Justin Rose, obviously, at over 55% ownership, is getting that kind of steam. But you know who's not getting that kind of steam? These guys like Brooks Koepka at T61. Like, he's out of it. People aren't going to use him because of the lack of placement points. Davis Thompson also isn't getting that kind of steam. Jake Knapp will, though, at T9. Like, the guys up top will get the extra 5 to 10%. but you're not going to see it on some of these other guys that were quote unquote out of it. Like we had with the question from James. That's why these guys are usable. And you don't want to just be picking names out of a hat. If you're trying to take some of those earlier starters, find breadcrumbs with the shots gained metrics like what we're going through right here and use that for your process. And it doesn't just have to be the ball striking like we have here. We can also use the short game to our advantage. And before we go through some of those candidates, I want to point out some of the opposite of that, some of the guys that are actually disadvantageous because of how they put it today. And that's the players that were well into the positive over here. And that includes a Steven Yeager, who we've already pointed out a few times, but a Ryan Gerard gained over 3.2 strokes putting today. A Joel Damon putted way over his head, and he was making bombs, like 30 to 50-foot bombs on the golf course that are extremely hard to see going down in back-to-back days. So a lot of these players are going to be fades in my exposure, and I hate to see that on Gerard. Gerard, by the way, is a ball striking first player. He's been doing that all week up until today, and then now he lost ball striking and gained 3 strokes putting. So we got to hope he gets back to his DNA tomorrow because I have a top 10 bet on him. And the ball striking was okay on the front 9 when he was -1 through 9 holes. But sorry, that's the wrong scorecard there. Let's go to today. The ball striking was great when he was actually -5 through his first 9 holes. I would say -1. That I think he was doing a lot better than that. But look at the back 9. Just missed fairway galore, was missing almost every single green on that back 9. I don't know what went wrong after he got past hole number 9, but he's got to figure that out heading into Sunday. And on the flip side of this, whereas this could be a bit of a red flag on some of the players that we just went through, around the green, the same thing. Chipping in multiple times is not going to happen a lot for these players. Sam Stevens, by the way, I know we got hooked on him today. You know what else was crazy about that? This birdie that he made, it was on his 6th hole. He started on the back 9 and then he finished on the front, I believe. Or sorry, we're looking at the wrong scorecard. That's throwing me off there. The birdie that he made at 7 on the finishing half of his front 9 was a chip from the middle of nowhere. It was like from 35 yards, short-sided to one of the most difficult holes that you had on the golf course. That's the bigger reason why he gained 2.6 strokes around the green. That is not going to happen very often on tour. So if you want to take some of these guys and downgrade them, you can do that as well as some of those guys that were gaining a whole bunch of putting. But on the flip side, if you lost a whole bunch of strokes putting and you were decent with the other categories, these are players that could see a bounce back in the other direction. And for example, Brooks Koepka's there at over 5.4 strokes lost with the putter. He 3-putted at least 3 times from what I saw, and some of them were from like 5 to 10 feet. So that was pretty tough to watch. But a Marcelo Rozo, Jackson Suber, oof. I probably should have kept him on the banned list. I used him today, and that was not one of my brighter plays that we've made this year. But he lost a whole bunch of strokes putting, so that was really his main issue today. That and the off the tee play being over 3 strokes into the negative. But if you can find players that were a little bit more reasonable with their ball striking stats, that's why Brooks made sense because he had the 2 strokes ball striking there. But Mac Meissner was about a field average player ball striking. That's okay. It's not great, but it's also not terrible. He lost 4 strokes putting. It's hard to feel like that's going to happen in back-to-back rounds. Got a Davis Thompson, just like a Brooks Koepka, also gained over 2 strokes ball striking and lost 3.5 strokes with a putter. These are guys that I'm using as bounce back candidates. And Rico Hoey would also check that same kind of box. He gained almost 2 strokes ball striking and was a victim on the greens and around the green at almost -3 strokes there. And Eric Cole, he gained 1.4 strokes ball striking, but he also lost 1.6 strokes on the greens. As one of the better putters that we have on the PGA Tour, that was also a little bit surprising. So that's how you use these metrics to your advantage. And, you know, some of the plays up top, like in Eric Cole's T14, so he's going to be kind of chalky. So maybe he's not the best example of one of these short game regression candidates. But like the Brooks was a good example. A Mac Meissner at T35, they're not going to be nearly as chalky as a lot of these other players around them. And if you're looking to take a shot on somebody to give you that leverage for the large 150 maxes, now these are the kind of players that I'm using for that. So with the player pool from before, that's where the shots gained ball striking comes in. Also the shots gained short game regression. But also remember that we had 4 other tags that we were using for our round 4 process. And that was the high upside players, players that make a whole lot of birdies, good course history players as well, good POA putters, and the placement point tag. Because round number 3, just like for our process for the last couple live streams that we've done, you don't just want to use one round of golf data and just think that you're going to get the absolute nuts from the next day. You have to be a little bit more well-rounded about it. And that's why we have some of those other tags to get to, just in case some of the noisy data from one round is kind of throwing us off. And for example, with the birdie or better stuff, you can go over to this round props tab on Bet the Number. Bet the Number, a sponsor of the live stream here. By the way, code Gsluke will give you a free trial off of any membership over there if you guys want to try out these tools for yourself and everything that they have. Also gives you a discount off any membership as well if you guys sign up after going through the free trial. So definitely make sure you use that code Gsluke to take advantage of that. But if we go over here and change this to like the last 36 rounds, and then we sort this by the players that make the most birdies or better, this is really something that I was using at the Amex because it was such an easy golf course. And birdie or better percentage was the main thing that we were optimizing on. But even if we're looking for some chasers, these are some guys that could make sense. So like a Cam Young made the cut, and Eric Cole, he's not really a chaser, but he has a really high birdie percentage. So that's just another reason to maybe consider using him. But players that did make the cut that are a little bit further down, like Castillo, Matt McCarty, Mac Meissner, who was also a pretty solid ball striker and short game regression candidate, is in that top 10 of the birdie or better percentage. That's another way that you could get to some creative plays. But on the spreadsheet that I was showing you guys before, you also have all the data you need for some of those other tabs. You got the POA putting for everyone that's in the field, not only their POA putting, but how it compares to their baseline. So you can see whether it's a favorable surface for them or not. And I don't know why I didn't play more Justin Rose this week, because look at the POA putting was great, and he's much better on that surface than what he's been doing lately. So maybe a little bit of oversight from my part there, a mistake. But that's where you can find a lot of those POA putting stats and use that to your advantage for round number 4. You've also got the event history. That's for Torrey Pines. You can use that to try and build out your player pool. I showed you where you can find some of those high upside stuff. And then the shots gained metrics, they have that on Bet the Number, but also on a lot of other databases. This is stuff that even just your everyday new better to golf can get into. So Patreon page is a good place to be. It does expedite that process for you and puts all the information together. And you can also see my player pool and all my projections over there as well. But that's what I've got for the DFS side. We're going to build a lineup and put a bow on that before moving on to the props and betting, which I'm looking forward to this board on Sunday. This is a hard golf course, typically one of the harder pin setups that we have of the year as well. So stoked to go through that. Give us another extra, like maybe 5 minutes before we get to that side of things. And we'll be giving you some exposure to tail for Sunday. And we're going to go through averages from today, weather report for props, also prize picks and underdog boards, and also some matchups on the sports books too. So stay tuned for all of that. Before I build this lineup, I do want to catch up on chat though and see if there was any last second deep dives that needed to be gone through. He said, dude, that guy was Chad Ramey in the past 2 contests, less than 1% owned in the course on Saturday, Sunday. Yeah, there's always that guy. And like, it's usually some random that you weren't expecting to go off. So if you're in the 150 max contest and you even want to set a roll to like force in somebody that's going to be sub 2% owned in my projections, I don't think that's a terrible idea, but you wouldn't do that in single entries or the cash lineups is getting a little bit too cute, but there's a time and place for it for sure. Let's deep dive on Mitchell for sure. Keith Mitchell, by the way, we played today, was one of my better plays in my player pool as well. We saw it coming. He had the ball striking and the short game regression profile going. But let's see exactly how he got it done today. He made a lot of putts from what I could tell with what we saw, and that's backed up by the stats. He gained over 3 strokes in the short game categories. So I'm not using him on Sunday, and it has a lot to do with how short game dependent he was today because the last 2 rounds were, in my opinion, the spot to go out there and buy Keith Mitchell. So it's also a little bit higher owned now because of his low round in the T14 starting position. But I love Killer Keith. He really fits the style of golf well. That's why I was a little bit higher on him this week than most people in the industry. He hits the ball long and straight. That plays well at major championship type of venues like this. And so not a surprise that he had that round today. I'm happy that we had him in quite a few lineups. He said he had it in first till the very end. Nice call. Yeah, I was in first until like the last 30 minutes. I was doing really well. I was in the $5 GPP mostly. Some of you guys may have seen me in the top 5 for quite a while. He was the main reason for that. Him and Jaeger just absolutely went batshit nuclear for me, but I didn't have any lineups with those 2 together. If I did, I probably shipped the $5 GPP today because my player pool was really solid elsewhere. A couple stinkers, but mostly very consistent -2s or better, which on an even par scoring average day was really good. But God, just getting the right combination is the hardest thing in PGA DFS. And I think I had 12% Jaeger, and I think it was closer to like 20% of the other nutted guy. If I had 25%, maybe 15%, I take down the $5. It's the small margins, man, but it was an okay day. I'm hoping to take something down. That'll be a good day. Deep dive on Hideki, please, for sure. First things first, even before we look at the stats, Sunday decky is the thing. If he's wearing the yellow shirt tomorrow, watch out. He's going low, but he was a little short game dependent today. He gained across all 4 stat categories, so that's just us being a little bit nitpicky with us saying that he was short game dependent. Still gained 0.7 strokes ball striking, so that's respectable enough with those 2 categories, but he did gain 2 strokes in the short game category. So we're going to need him to be a little bit more ball striking heavy to get that job done, but just like a few of the other guys that are good course fits here, hits the ball long and straight, and he gains across all 4 categories. So he's somebody that grades out as like a 7.5, even an 8 out of 10, despite the short game being a little bit better than we'd hope. But I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Hideki Matsuyama is a streaky player, especially in those short game categories. So it's maybe not as big of a red flag as it'd be with other people. Did you miss a Haltong review? We did it ever so shortly, but I'll give you the longer version here of Long Dong Haltong. Just ball striking the living hell out of it. He's not going to win for us at the 100-1 that we bet him on. I wish he would, obviously, but it's going to be a little bit too much of a long shot now. But the way that he's done it at the South Course all week, he's had his best rounds at the South Course, and it's been all the off the tee play. The approach play today was the main thing that stood out, was off the tee the other round at the South Course. This is a 8.5 out of 10 stat profile. So not much negative to say about my guy. He's one of my favorite players on tour, and the better and better he plays this year, the higher in those rankings he's going to ascend. He's getting close to one of my top five favorite players currently. So he's definitely somebody I'll be rooting for and using in lineups. It makes a lot of sense. You feel like the Koepka putter has to come around after just being average. You feel like you can maybe attack him. Yeah, I don't know if it's going to happen tomorrow per se. It's going to happen at some point over the next month or so, though. He's just a good putter historically. Maybe not the most consistent putter historically, but he has those spike performances. And when he matches that spike performance up with the spike ball striking like you've seen so far this week, then he wins events. So hopefully it happens for him on Sunday. He'll be super low owned. I'll be rooting for him because he's in my top 5, top 10 favorite players. But the losing 5 strokes today, we got to see a lot of that round because he was on the featured group coverage, and then CBS was following him around the golf course, even though he's at T61. That's wild to me, by the way. Like, I know he's new to the tour. You want to show him off and, kind of give the middle finger to live a little bit in the process. But we didn't need to see the guy that's 19 shots off the lead for like half of the coverage for the last 2.5 hours. And they were really ugly putts. That's what I wanted to get to at that, because we got to see him out there. He was missing from like 4 to 5 feet. That's probably, it's going to be an easy fix, right? Missing 4 to 5 footers is something that you can fix rather easily. And it was the speed. Like, he was just jamming them way past the hole. If he gets the speed down, I think he's going to make a lot more putts. So whether that's this week, next week, 2 weeks from now, when he does it, you want to be there. That's for sure. Yeah. He's another Haltong Lee fan in the chat. He's my boy, man. He's, like I said, getting close to the top 5 at this point. Jordan Spieth's still number 1. Justin Thomas is up there too. Luke Clanton, I have to put in the top 5. That's a non-negotiable. But he's getting close to that conversation. Let's put a lineup and then go on to the prop and the betting side, like I was mentioning. And with our round 4 process, the difference compared to rounds 2 and 3 is just making sure that we have enough placement points in our lineups. But having enough placement points, just a little bit of a disclaimer, does not mean jam in placement points for all 6 spots. If you're going to be that clown that just sorts this by score and then takes these top 6 players, I don't even know if you can. Let's see. You can almost do it. You can take like the top 5 and then a Steven Yeager and leave $600 on the table and play all guys that are T6 or better. If you build that sort of lineup, you're guaranteed to duplicate yourself a million different times, and you're not going to have any leverage in your lineup. And while we do need some of these guys towards the top, they don't necessarily have to be starting in the top 5 to get those top 5 placement points. If you, for example, excuse me there, a little bit of a steak giving me a burp, I guess. But if we go down to this T14 or the T20 spot, one of these players shoots a -3, that could get them into the top 5, or at the very least the top 10 with their placement points. So you can use these players for the 2 to 4 players that you're using towards the top. But let's start this one off with a Justin Rose. Let's take the piece of mega chalk towards the top just to show you how you have to navigate that kind of thing. I'm going to avoid Joel Damon and some of the 7K chalk that I find especially disgusting. And rather, we're going to build around players that I think are worthy of being used towards the top end of the board. So that would be your Justin Rose, Siwoo Kim, another stud. And even then, we still have $7,600 remaining for our last couple spots. Let's throw in Haltong Lee at $7,700. Rather than starting T6 or better, he was at, T9. So he's going to be a little bit more moderately owned at that point. We scroll down a little bit further and maybe find our 4th player, Ryan Gerard, at like $8,800. Now we've got our 4 placement point guys. It's going to be high ownership on all 4 of these players. It's not going to be as egregious as taking like just the guys starting in the top 5. But we have, at least for the large field 150 max contest, we're really going to have to force our hand for our last 2 spots. We're going to get some sub 10%ers in for both of those. And we might even want to consider leaving salary on the table to make sure we're not going to duplicate ourselves with a few other lineups. So let's start with the first player out of those 2. We're at about $7,100 remaining for those last 2. Mac Meissner at the middle end of the board. He's probably not finishing top 5 for us, but if he shoots a -3 with the really good shots gained profile that we're going through before, that could get us to the optimal lineup. And then now we're at about $6,900 remaining. I'd say if you play a Dan Brown, you might be in some issues with duplication, even though we do have that one piece of leverage in there and a Meissner, because Dan Brown's going to be about 10% owned starting at that T20 spot. So if you want to be safe about it, go to a piece of leverage like a Sam Ryder or a Rico Hoey instead. That's not going to have the same kind of placement point potential, but they will be sub 10% owned, or even better, leave some salary on the table and go down to a Castillo, a Danny Walker, Rio Hisatune. You might even duplicate with that, though, unfortunately, because he's going to be that piece of 25% ownership that we have in the 6K range, maybe even close to 30% in some single entry contests. Even if you leave $200, $300 on the table and play a Hisatune there, you might duplicate yourself a few different times. But if you were to go down and play a Tony Finau instead, where you're leaving the $300 and you're playing somebody that's sub 10% owned, you're not going to duplicate yourself. You're almost assured of that by making that kind of a pivot. And it's giving you a couple pieces of leverage to actually move up into GPPs if you end up hitting the nuts on them. And this isn't just a random pull out of the hat kind of play. If you rounded this off with a Tony Finau there, he was the number 2 or 3 ball striker that we had for round number 3. Meissner was in that top 15. A couple of these other stands that we took towards the top end of the board made sense for one reason or another. That's the kind of process that you want for Sunday. You want to have enough placement points in there, enough leverage as well. And you want to make sure that your player pool and the players that you're actually using, you have a rhyme and reason for using, that you're not just doing it for the sake of doing it. There are enough players to choose from, 74 to be exact, that made the cut at this event, that you don't need to be just doing that at random. So that's the main thing I'd say to take away with your round 4 process, and to not overcomplicate it. That's for the large field GPPs. That's as far as you have to take it from the leverage angle. If you're in a single entry or in a cash lineup where it's not as big of a deal, then you don't even have to force in as much leverage as what we were doing right there. So that's it for the DFS angle. I hope to see you guys at the top end of a lot of those GPPs. We're going to go through props and bets next. So trying to find some value with the prize picks and underdog board, also on some of these sports books. But that's all for the DFS side of things. I will go over any last second questions if you guys want to throw those in the chat. But for the next half an hour to maybe 40 minutes on the live stream, we're going to be focusing on some exposure for Sunday. So we'll find a few community tails, some pieces of exposure that we can enter and hopefully cash out on to end this week solid. But for all that content for the DFS angle that I was mentioning before, you guys can find that on the Golf DFS tier on my Patreon. There's a link in the description of the video to go out there and join. That's where that spreadsheet I was showing you before is. It's obviously uncensored on there. Everything is completely unblacked out. And that's where you can find all of my content for Sunday on the DFS side. But now let's go through some prop stuff. We'll catch up a chat so I can get a sip of the water over here. And let's try and actually get something to full cash this time. That'd be pretty nice. Dan Brown. So you're asking for a deep dive, I'm assuming. So he had the really good ball striking, like the 2.55 shots gained to the positive on approach, that is. But a lot of that came on one shot alone. And that was the shot into 9 where he hit it to 5 feet and then made an eagle. But even outside of that, he still gained off the tee, was still probably at least half a stroke or a stroke into the positive with the approach play otherwise. So it's a 6 or even a 7 out of 10 stat profile. Somebody that lost strokes putting could have been a little bit better there. He's at T20. That's a pretty good starting position. But the issue is that he is getting some ownership. So he's one of those 7K, 6K range players that's going to be double to even 5 times the ownership of some of the players around them. So you've got to navigate that. If you've got a piece of leverage in your lineup elsewhere, then totally fine to use that kind of a play. But he won't be one of those guys that's, a sneaky play by any means. Like there's going to be a good amount of people that are using him. Joel Damon getting his card back. I hope so. He's got a long way ahead of him to get into the top 100 by the end of the year, but he's guaranteed into the waste management next week. He got a sponsor exemption for that. By the way, love that. He's had a lot of fun at the waste management over the years, taking his shirt off and whatnot at 16. But also he's getting into the week after that if he top 10s this week. So that will be the Cognizant, the next non-signature field event after the waste management next week. I'm surely rooting for him, man. He's playing some solid golf other than today. It was a little bit short game dependent for my liking today, but that's us being nitpicky on that. Let's go through these averages. So the averages for round 3 got easier, like we called for, which is why it was a bit frustrating that I didn't have a massive prop day today, because the course played literally exactly as I called for. 3.5 birdie average because of some of those softer pin locations. Bogey average dropped a little bit, not a ton though, even though the cut line happened. Fairway average was still less than 8 per round. It went up a little bit from the 7.4 mark yesterday. I thought it might be a little bit closer to like 7.5, 7.6, but the 7.76 is still much lower than the baseline at this course. And then the green regulation average went up to about 11.43 per round. I thought it'd be an 11.25 to maybe 11.5 range for today. So not a big surprise there either. It honestly should play pretty similar overall heading into Sunday. But the factor that we haven't been able to break down quite yet, and I think in 8 minutes, we're going to get the pin location. So we might be able to do that here together rather quickly. But every time they have a Sunday setup at this golf course, there's some pin locations that just like make your eyes go wide. You go, what the hell? They have to play with that kind of a pin. And they were teasing it on the broadcast today. Jim Nance was talking about a conversation that he had with the architect that redid the South course. I think it was like 7 years ago. And he said it was all about having the really difficult back Sunday pin locations. And that's exactly what we're going to get for tomorrow. And they will give the players a few bones, like 3 will be at the front left. They're actually going to move up the tee box 2 spots is what they said on the broadcast. So that will be a little bit easier. But like 9, for example, 9, we haven't seen the pins yet. So this is just speculative. It's probably going to be in the back left on top of that shelf. That's going to lower the birdie rate and make the scoring average of that hole potentially over par. Last year, when it played into the wind and they had that pin location, it played like 0.3 strokes over par. Now, it's not going to be windy tomorrow, so that factor's gone. Maybe it's closer to an even par scoring average, but those kind of changes have drastic impacts on the scoring. In fact, I hate to want to like speculate before we see those pins, but let's say that it is that typical Sunday setup, and it's as hard as what we normally have at this event on a Sunday. Birdie average is going to drop to probably like 3.25 per round at the most, I would say. Maybe even the whole 3 birdies per round, like we had for round number 2. The bogey average, that'll go up to at least 3.25 per round, if not 3.5 per round, compared to what you had today. With that in mind, that takes the scoring average from marginally under par to an over par scoring average in most cases. That's why I said a half a stroke over par was what I think is going to be the accurate scoring average for tomorrow. And that's what I'm using in terms of my projections for Sunday. So you can kind of extend that to some of these bottom categories too. The fairway average, I think, will be extremely consistent. I wouldn't expect that to move more than 0.1 in either direction. The green average, though, that one could be impacted by the pin locations. That could drop to like 11.25 per round, maybe even 11 per round. Because the other thing we have to consider here is that the rough hasn't been cut. It's not going to be cut before the Sunday at the Farmers, I wouldn't imagine. I guess they could try and switch it up on us and make it a birdie fest for the final day, but that would be extremely uncalled for and just unheard of at this event. It's going to be lush rough. The greens are only getting firmer because there's no rain in the forecast. And that's why I think that this course is going to get a little bit tougher to play tomorrow. So looking at this prize picks board, I think that there could be some fade value to be had. And the prize picks board wasn't posted before we went live here. So I wasn't able to fully deep dive that before we got on here. But I went through the underdog board and I got a pretty good idea with some of the sportsbook lines on sites like Draftkings and Fanduel. So I know what the industry sentiment is. So we can kind of hop in here a little bit quicker than what we have over the last couple days. And I was looking at some of these round strokes before we logged on here, especially these guys at 71.5 that are about field average players. It feels like there could be some value towards the over on like, a Sam Stevens. I looked at the value on the books. He's about even money. I would go back to that, even though he went under by 0.5 today. Harder pin setup. He also lucked out with that chip in, so he shouldn't even have gone under today. Also, guys like Pearson Cootie, he's at 71.5. A Matt McCarty at 71.5. I would prefer if they were guys that were maybe short game dependent, where we could add that traditional analysis on top of it. But with the tough setup, if I see the kind of pin locations that I'm expecting for Sunday at Torrey Pines, then I'm going to be on quite a few of those overs that we just pointed out. And I was looking at the birdie or better lines. I was kind of shocked that they had so many of these players juiced towards the over. And for example, we don't even have to fade Sam Stevens for strokes if we want to. We go to this birdie or better line. He's actually a 0.84x multiplier towards the over. I don't agree with that at all. Like Sam Stevens was not an elite tier birdie maker last year. In fact, I want to bring up the PGA Tour website so I can show you guys the 2025 averages. I don't think he was terrible at making birdies, but at least if memory serves me correctly, he was like field average at the best in the category. So let me go ahead and reshare the screen so that we can go through this together. And let's see, so 2025 Sam Stevens. Stevens was number 154 on tour last year in the category. So if the average today was 3.5, but then they're giving us a harder pin setup because it's Sunday at Torrey Pines, maybe that average goes down to like 3.25 per round. How the hell is the number 154 player on tour in the category being juiced that heavily towards the over direction? So I could see some unders on this category. Elite tier players I would probably avoid for that. Like a Nico Højgaard makes a whole lot of birdies. Like I could see him actually being juiced towards the over, but like an Andrew Novak, that feels like a little bit of a too positive of a projection. I was looking at some of these other guys on here too, like an Eric Cole, even for the under, Chris Ventura for the under. And I guess the problem is with some of those leans is that the sports books, DraftKings, for example, that has all of the lines posted, has a lot of them juiced towards the over at that 3.5 mark, which is kind of perplexing to me. I don't understand why they think the golf course is going to play easier with the golf course being set up a little bit trickier. But maybe that just gives us some extra value that we can attack for tomorrow. So that was the underdog deep dive. We can go back to that, maybe enter a slip if there's not that much value that I see here on Prize Picks. But Prize Picks typically has the bigger board between the two sites. So that's why I want to look through Prize Picks before we go out there and settle on enter anything first. Let's see. How owned will Brooksy be with those shots gained putting numbers? Sub 10%, probably closer to the 5 to 7.5% range. So if ownership's the concern, get rid of that concern. You're good to go for Sunday. He said he loved the Miami hat. Thank you. I'm not a big Miami fan, but I am from the area, and I kind of root for them. It's kind of like the Buccaneers. Like I kind of root for the Buccaneers too. What the heck happened to Gerard today? He said a tale of two nines. Yeah, so we went through it a little bit earlier, but front nine was great, hitting the ball well and making putts. Back nine, the ball striking went sideways. So he's definitely got to improve that to have a day for us on Sunday. And I've got a top 10 bet on him. So I'm really hoping that he can turn that around. So just, the ball striking went awry. And that back nine, it is such a difficult off the tee nine that if anyone's missing fairways, you're going to shoot the +4 to +5 that he did from today. That's almost unavoidable if you're hitting the ball like that. Any early thoughts on Damon for the WM? At least with his ownership, he seems to like that home course. He does. He plays out of Scottsdale, so I'm sure he plays quite a bit there, at least more than a lot of the other players that'll be playing there next week. I think if he finishes strong, he finishes top 5 at this event, you're going to be looking at a 5 to a 10% owned Joel Damon. If he falls off and ends up choking on Sunday, then you're probably looking at a sub 5% owned Joel Damon. So it's all going to come down to tomorrow. And that recency bias that we have on Sundays is massive on tour. You got Novak under 7.5 fairways. He rallied hard on the back nine to go over that number, but you could see him cashing quite easily for the thoughts. Yeah, I'm on the under. I mean, I took him for today and he went over by 0.5. And some of the quote unquote hits that he had were sketchy. They were within like a yard or two in some cases. And Shot Tracker is not always reliable. So they could have been misses for all we know, especially because he wasn't on the broadcast. But yeah, if you're fading him at 7.5 with the 7.7 average that we had from today, he's a well below average player in that category. I did it today. So doing it again tomorrow with similar type of conditions, I think makes a lot of sense. Now, the only pushback I'll give you on that is that the sportsbook line yesterday was juiced towards the under. It agreed with our sentiment. Now he's actually juiced, I think, -125 towards the over on a site like DraftKings. So it would be slightly more advantageous to play it on like a DraftKings for like the -105 or the +100 that's available towards the under. But on a pick'em site, it's not like a horrendous play, I'll say. Thoughts on Mitchell over Gerard at plus money? I don't know if I could do that because Gerard is such a consistent player. I know Gerard had the poor ball striking, but Keith Mitchell was also a little short game dependent too. So the plus money makes it more acceptable. I don't think it's like mispriced or anything at that kind of a number, but I couldn't pull the number. I couldn't pull the trigger on that myself. I'm just somebody that likes the floor of a Gerard, and that gives you in a 50-50 format, like a head-to-head, you want the consistent guy. You don't really want the volatile birdie maker that can shoot -5, -6 like a Keith Mitchell. You want the slow burn -1s, the -2s, and that's what Ryan Gerard delivers. It's a good week to bet Ludwig at the Masters. That's going to depend on form for me, man. He's had something going on. I actually think it's an injury that's been undisclosed, and I'm not going to speculate too much, but I noticed it, at least from what I saw this week, that he wasn't bending down to put the ball on the tee like most players were. He was rigid. It was like he was only bending his front knee 45%. And I want to get more information on that before I say anything else. But from what I saw, it looked like he wasn't 100%. So I would hold off on that for now, especially if something comes out over the next couple weeks. You don't want to get caught with your pants down on that. But let's take a look at this Prize Picks board. So they've got similar pricing on at least the guys that were on both websites. But like a 71 on a Wyndham Clark, -1 is a bit optimistic, I would say, for somebody that's a loose cannon like him. Even a Keegan Bradley at 71 feels a bit optimistic. Same kind of projections on Ryan Gerard from site to site. Like I could see a Chris Gotterup being at that -1 projection because he's so consistent. He really fits the style of golf well. But some of these other guys are a bit sketchier in my opinion. And you also have the Pearson Coody at that 71.5 mark. But I would actually like to find somebody that's in poor form that is towards the bottom end of the leaderboard that we can fade, that maybe doesn't have the same kind of motivation as what we have with the players at the top. So the kind of player that would fit that description would be like an Emiliano Grillo. He's a decent course fit, so I don't like that, but he's, at least if memory serves me correctly, towards the bottom end of the leaderboard. And if it starts badly for him, he'll probably kind of mail it in. And a T61, he's a prime candidate for that sort of thing. Who else could we take that's going off late? A lot of these guys are towards the top end of the board. Not the case with Tom Kim, though. I guess he would be a potential fade candidate, but I do prefer the 71.5 a little bit more than the 72. Excuse me there. So let's use Griot for now, just because I think that 0.5 matters. And let's look at this birdie or better board too. So birdie or better, and I've got a lot of guys at 3.5. If I think the average is going to drop from 3.5 birdies, there are some no-brainers towards the under that we have on the board here too. So one of them we already played this week. It was the Pavon under at 3.5. That was kind of the obvious one that was standing out to me when we first clicked on the category, especially because it was number 174 last year on tour at making birdies or better. And just to show you guys that, only 6 players on tour that were worse in the category than Matthew Pavon in 2025. So if we were going to try and fade somebody at that mark, he would be at least one of the first few players I'd consider for that. Mackenzie Hughes, we could throw into that conversation as well. Mackie Hughes, as you can see, excuse me there, was number 171 on tour in the category. So he'd also be somebody that we'd be projecting below that average. But they're towards the middle end of the leaderboard. That's why they have that early tee time for Sunday. I would almost prefer it to be one of these guys that's out of contention that is playing some pretty shitty golf. And obviously Griot was one of those guys before, but like a Tom Kim, I don't think his birdie or better stats were very good either. So number 60, he was closer to a field average player in that category. I'm not sure whether it's worth taking a field average player as opposed to a shitty player in the category just because of their form so far this week. But it's at least something to throw out there. So I like those 3 leans so far. The payout's going to be shit on that. So we're obviously going to have to try and manage that and maybe just take a 2-man instead for someone for closer to like 2.6x. But I've got birdie or better matchups that we could look at. I was looking at this earlier. All of these are pretty appropriately priced, if I'd have to say so myself. Then I want to look at this fairways. And yeah, they had the birdie or better matchups before, but not any of these other categories. So I was able to go through those ones already. But let's see what we have for this. So there's the Novak 7.5. Just out of curiosity, what does that do? Is that a 2.6x too? So yeah, no point to really do that. We could look at an over if somebody's an accurate driver here. Like it doesn't have to be an under that we're taking in this category. But I don't see any overvalue that really is obvious upon first glance. So I hate the payouts on these double fade slips, but it might be the prudent way to go about this. I want to compare Pavon and Hughes real quick. So that's what we're going to do. I'm actually going to go to the matchup tab, and we're going to do a live comparison with their rounds at the South Course. And whoever's been more short game dependent, we're going to fade. So similar shots gained total this week. So Hughes is better in both ball striking categories, and Matthew Pavon has kind of luck sacked it with the putter so far. Let's take a look at how Pavon's done so far this week at the South Course. I know he went under for us in round 2 by 0.5 by the skin of our teeth, but what did he do today? So that's the under by 0.5. What did he do today? He made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 birdies. Oh boy. That's not exactly what we wanted to see, but he was up and down. The ball striking was a problem. That's why he made a lot of those bogeys. Let's actually go to the PGA Tour. I want to see the length of the putts that he was making, because that's if they were a lot of long birdie putts, then maybe it's not as much of a problem. But let's see what it looked like. So dart, okay. That's a good shot. Dart. That's a good shot. Dart. Okay. Maybe we got to give some respect to him. Like, he obviously had some bad shots, and that's why he's still only shot -2. But a lot of these birdies, like, he hit a par 5 and 2, and then 2-putted. This is the longest putt that he made. It was like a 15 to a 20 footer at hole number 8. Let's look at Hughes instead. So Hughes is going off at the same time, one of the first tee times off tomorrow. And he made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 birdies today. Also pretty impressive. But let's see how it was done. That was, what, a 15-footer, 11-footer. So that's pretty reasonable. This was a par 5 that he hit into, so that's also pretty reasonable. Was that another 15-footer? Yeah, about that. That was a dart. So the one at 5 was a legit birdie. What did he do at 6? 6 was a par 5, and then he just got up and down on that one. I mean, they both played pretty well, actually. Like, I've got to at least give them some respect for how they played for today. I didn't fade either of them, luckily, for their birdie or better props. But let's see what they have them at the odds. Like, I don't obviously adhere myself to the plus EV strategy, but it's always good to know where the books have these kind of guys. So no line for Hughes, probably no Pave on line either. Yeah. Neither one of those have a line posted. But if we try and find a comparable player to use, like, Denny McCarthy is a better player than both of those in the category and just in general. And he's about even money at that sort of a spot. I want to see if we can find anyone that's juiced towards the under. Like, for example, a John Perry is. He's -148 towards the under. And he's probably on that same kind of level as one of those kind of players. Justin Lauer is probably a lower tier player than some of those players. And he's -164 towards the under. I say lower tier just because he's not as good, like, from the shots gained perspective. But if we go to birdie or better percentage, I'm pretty sure Lauer was better than a lot of these other guys that we've already gone through at number 149. So if he's going to be -160 towards the under, like, you can see why I think that it's pretty heavy value on some of these lanes. And Daniel Brown's about even money. Eric Cole's about even money, actually even a little bit juiced towards the under. Adam Schenk is -162 under. Let's see where he ranked out last year. He was number 126, closer to the field average. You're telling me that there's that kind of value on those players? These other guys are obviously even bigger value than that. So here's how we're going to break that tie. I'm going to go to my DFS projection sheet, and we're just going to base it based on pure form. Who has had the worst form over their last 12 measured rounds? Because everything other than that seems pretty 50-50 at this point. So I'm just bringing up the sheet that's not censored so that I can go through some of that form. Mackenzie Hughes losing 0.22 strokes over his last 12. That's on a per round average. And then Matthew Pavon is losing 0.56 shots gained per round over that sample size. So that's the tiebreaker that we'll use for the under. And it's not an ideal payout, but this makes a whole lot of sense just from the traditional analysis perspective. And to do a little bit of line shopping on Griot, I don't think he had an actual round score line that we can compare to exactly. I'll just double check in case. And yeah, he doesn't have one. But, like, Sam Stevens has been a lot more consistent, and he's even money at that 71.5 number. I'm going to see if we can find somebody that's juiced towards the over, and we can find that right here with a Matt McCarty, who's -128. Just to show you a comparison on this, let's go back to the matchup tab. This is a really good way to do this. Let's go McCarty, and then Griot, he's actually been pretty trash over the last 24 and 48 round sample size. Let's use the last 24, then we'll zoom out to the last 48 on these two players as well. Matt McCarty, again, he's juiced -128 towards the over at that 71.5 mark, and he's just a way better player. He's 1.8 shots better per round over the last 24 rounds, and he's already close to a plus EV value. We zoom out even more, where Griot's going to be a lot more favorable. He's still 0.3 strokes better per round over that sample size, and he's already close to that plus EV range. And then you add on top of it that Griot's having a really shitty week. He might not be fully locked in for tomorrow. Same thing with Pavon going off in the middle end of tee times. That's why we're going to take that two men together. And again, not the biggest payout. I'd rather it be closer to 3x if we can, but I think the value is going to be on that fade side of things. So that'll be the first slip that we take for Sunday. And now that we've waited long enough, let's see if they have those pin locations posted, because that's the only thing that we haven't been able to deep dive to this point. And if they're giving us a harder than normal pin setup, I'm going to feel even better about some of those leans that we just entered. But bear with me as I bring up those pin locations and bring up the shot trails from today so that we can compare them and see whether it's going to get easier or harder. And it's almost certainly going to be harder, because today was one of the easiest pin setups that you could have had at this course. But you never know, I guess. Like, they could throw us a complete curveball and an easier setup. So let's go out there and confirm it before we say anything like that. Let's catch up on chat, though. So he said, thanks for the info, Luke. I got you, Mr. Aaron. Seamus for the under 3.5 birds, Sunday pins, and had a ton of regression today as an average birdie maker. Yeah, I could get behind that. Just to go to the stats from last year, he had a down year, so he should be worse than average in the category, you'd think. Let's see, where's he at? So number 89 is actually, yeah, about that field average in the category. I could still get behind it, though, especially, well, actually, we're looking at the wrong stats. We got to go to 2025. That'll be better for us. And by the way, I just realized, I think we were doing that with a few of the other players too by mistake. But yeah, still number 87 on tour in the category. I don't think it's a terrible lean, though. I wouldn't give you too much pushback on that. Where did we leave off? Do I suggest hitting the lowers on birdies? Brooks tee to green been crazy. I wouldn't do it on Brooks, but I would say hitting some lowers on birdies on like a Pavon, a Hughes like we were going through, make a little bit more sense just because they're towards the bottom end of the category on tour. What are my thoughts on a Joel for the under 72 strokes? So that's at rate at even par. It's not my favorite play just because of the pressure that he's going to be dealing with. I hope I'm wrong. I mean, I'll obviously hope that Joel Damon plays well because I want him to get his card back, and he's such a good character. He's such a rootable guy, such a likable player on tour. However, the reality is, like, putting my fandom aside, he's been really shitty on tour, been very inconsistent for 6 months, and he's got the most to lose of anyone in contention. Justin Rose has nothing to lose. He's won here before. He's almost a bona fide Hall of Famer at this point. So he's also rich as hell. So he doesn't have anything to lose. Joel Damon is not in that same kind of situation. So that's why I don't know if I'd like the under on that one. And also you're leaning for the Haltong under at 72 strokes. So with these Sunday pins, I want to go through the pin locations before I really give you my take. But assuming that these are difficult, I don't know if those are my favorite plays. And I'm rooting for Haltong too. I'd say if you were choosing between those two, Haltong is by far the better play because he doesn't have as much to lose. He also has the better shots gained profile heading into Sunday. And we were showing this a little bit earlier when we were going through DFS. But if we take a look at the shots gained metrics for both of them in round number 3, and we're just going to do this super quickly on them. But a Damon gained over 3 strokes in the short game categories. That's pretty unsustainable. And if we take a look at the other side, Haltong, he did it in the exact opposite fashion. He did it by gaining off the tee and gaining on approach, which is a lot more sustainable than what you have with the short game category. So I don't know if I can endorse the under on Haltong quite yet, but if you had to choose one of them, it would be that one for me. Stevens and Grillo both over 71.5 is 2.5 on better. My thoughts? Yeah, so the exposure that I'm going to enter JT North probably will be on better for what I post on my Patreon page because, like you said, the multiplier is way better at 2.8x. Unfortunately, I can't bring better up here on the live stream, though, as I think it's only on the app right now. But yeah, if you want to take some fades over there, I think it makes a whole lot of sense. And that's probably what I'll end up doing myself. And as an added aside, they don't have me limited on better. So I think I can enter up to like $1,000 slips there because I have a brand new account. That's another added benefit of being able to enter on better, but at least before they end up pulling the plug on me, which will probably only take a couple weeks at this point, but we'll take advantage of it while we can. What's going on, Hoobs? Welcome on in, my dude. Thoughts on Maddie for the over 3.5? Let's look through these pins, man. Like, it's like with the unders at 72. If it's hard pins, then no, I can't get behind it. Sorry to check in late last night to see you handling that ass clown. All good, man. That's just the reality of being online. You're going to get your good apples and your bad apples. Luckily for us around here, we've got a lot more good apples than the bad apples. So I appreciate all of you guys watching and you Hoops for checking in on us and everything like that. Let's catch up on chat. Well, not catch up on chat. We're good on chat. Let's go through some matchup stuff now, actually. So we've already gone through most of the stuff I wanted to go through on DFS. I think you guys kind of actually, we're going to go through these pin locations. What am I saying? I knew we needed to go through something, so my apologies there. Let me get a sip of this water. First off, we have a front left pin at hole number 1. I'd say it's about the same difficulty as today. It's easier than the round 1 and 2 pin location, which was on this very back right corner. Today, though, you had a little bit more room to hit the shot closer. So if you missed the fairway at 1, you could actually hit the ball close. Unfortunately for players now that it's in that very front left corner, if you're coming out of the rough, you have no chance to hit it close. So that's going to be maybe even slightly more difficult than that just because of that aspect. Let's go to 2 next. 2 is in the very back right corner. This is the hardest pin that you have at this hole. There's a lot of slope at this portion of the green. And if you've ever played PGA Tour 2K25, you know why this pin location is so hard. If you play it on like the fast green speeds, there's almost no way to hold it on this section of the green. And it's like that in real life as well. So it'll be a little bit harder than today. I'm not going to say it's going to be like mega difficult because the winds are going to be down and it's still a short sub 400 yard par 4, but it's a slightly harder spot to get close to because of all that slope. Next up, we have 3, which this will be a much different looking hole. It's that front left pin that I was mentioning before, and they're going to move the tee box up here as well. So it won't play 192. It'll be towards this pin location here and closer to 145 yards. And because it plays downhill, you're going to see players hitting wedge into this front left pin location. So I'd say 1 is a decent birdie look. 2 is maybe kind of tricky, but 3, if you hit a good shot, you should have a shot at birdie from 5 to 10 feet. But after that is normally where it goes to shit at the Sunday setup at this course. So let's see what we've got. 4 is that. 4 is in the very back middle corner. It's on the small section of the green. And this is one of those back pin locations that the architect was talking about when he redesigned the golf course. It is just a smaller section to hit into. It creates awkward angles if you miss the fairway as well. Scoring average is going to be a little bit harder at 4 for sure. Next up, we have 5, which is in the very middle left of the screen. I'd say it's actually about the same difficulty as today. I would shade even towards the easier side if I had to pick one direction or the other. Only reason I say that is that now it's on a little bit of a low area as opposed to this little bit of a shelf on the left side. Unfortunately, though, the reason why it's not quite as easy as that is that now it's closer towards the bunker, and a short-sided miss there is going to be kind of difficult to get up and down. Let's go to 6 next. So 6 is going to be on the very middle right side of the screen. It's like the 3rd easiest or 2nd easiest pin, I would say. This pin was actually the hardest that you had at hole number 6. It's still a little bit further into the green complex, so that's why it's the 2nd or the 3rd easiest. But the easiest pin is when they put it on this low area on the left. So it's not going to be a gimme birdie, but should be either the easiest or the 2nd easiest hole that you have on the course. Let's go to 7 next. 7 is a very front middle pin. So these pins actually don't look that bad. I was kind of hoping they'd be harder than this. So this is at least good to see, but this is another like kind of low spot pin. So we have a couple hard ones so far, but definitely a couple easy ones. The back 9 is more than likely where it's going to get harder though. So we'll see that. 8's in the very front middle. It's a harder pin than today. Today it was on a low area. You had this backstop that you could use to get it close. Tom Hoagie actually almost made a hole-in-one using that little backstop today. So now that it's on that little front middle pin location, you have to get it over that slope, which makes distance control just a little bit harder. Let's go to 9 next to that long par 5. And yeah, this is a very underrated pin location. This pin location on the back shelf over here played over par last year when it was playing into the wind. That's partially because it's a 600-yard par 5 and it's got that long rough to it. But I think the birdie rate here tomorrow is probably going to be sub 15%. So I don't think you should be counting in your guys to make a birdie at 9. 3 is a pretty good chance at it. Even 5 and 6 are really reasonable birdie looks too. But 9's not going to be something that I'd include in that. Let's go to the back 9 now. So you have 10, which is on this back right corner. It's the 2nd hardest pin that you have at this hole. The hardest is when they have it in this back left corner, but it's also a pretty long shot into the back corner for tomorrow. Let's go up to 11 next. So 11 is going to be in the very back left, by far the hardest pin that you have at this hole. It's on top of the shelf, and you have a side slope to the right of it, which takes the ball further away. They've tipped it out for the first 2 rounds. What I mean by that is they played it from the back tee box. They more than likely do it again. If they move it up a tee box, it may stay around the same difficulty. It might not play to its true, +3 to +0.4 over par scoring average if they move it up to closer to 190 yards. But we'll see what they do there. I hope they tip it out. 12 is going to be in the very back middle. It's a more accessible pin location, but this is going to play like 520 yards. So this is another one that's still going to play over par. Today, this was the hardest hole on the golf course with the back left pin. I would say that this one is slightly easier just because it's a bigger portion of the green, but this is the 2nd hardest pin that you have at that hole. Let's go to 13. 13 is a front middle pin. This is the easiest pin that you have at this hole. Actually, is this the right hole? Sorry, wrong hole that I'm thinking of. I thought that this was 17 that we were looking at. I don't know why. We still have a long way to go before we get to 17. This is the easiest pin location that we have at 13. So this is a par 5 that isn't really reachable. Not a whole lot of people other than Chris Gotterup that were able to get it on the green in 2 today. Gotterup, by the way, had a tap-in eagle at this hole. It was one of the best golf shots that I've seen in a long time from anyone on the PGA Tour, at least with a fairway wood from that far out to almost make an albatross. It's just absolutely insane. But now that it's in this low area, you're going to have a better chance to hit a wedge in there, I would say. But if you hit it up near the green in 2 and you miss to the left or the right, getting up and down to this pin location is extremely hard. And I mean, let's just kind of like think through it. If you hit it to this right side pin high to where the pin location was today, you've got to hit it over this massive slope, which has a lot of side slope to it. And it's going to really speed up your golf ball as it gets down to this little corner. Getting the ball to stop within 5 feet of that pin is unbelievably hard to do. And it's the same thing from the other side. The slope's a little less severe on this side of things. But if you miss to the left or the right at this hole, good luck trying to make a birdie. So what I think you'll see 99% of the field do, unless you're a bomber and you hit it 350 off the tee and you're in the fairway, then go for it in 2 if it's well within your firepower. But for everyone else, we're just going to lay up with a wedge, and then you're going to try and use this slope. This one here is the one that I think you could use because it's got the side slope moving you closer towards the hole. You hit it on the slope and you could hit it to 4 or 5 feet, I would say. So I think that's what you're going to see a little bit more often. Birdie average probably stays about the same though. Like, I don't think it's going to change the scoring there as much as the strategy involved at going after number 13. Let's go to 14 next. 14 is in the very middle of the screen. This is the easiest pin, or sorry, second easiest pin, I'd say, at 14. Easiest just as they put it in the very front portion of it, but they haven't done that the entire week. This middle portion is the biggest part of the green, so that's why I say that one's a bit easier. Let's go to 15. So 15 is a front right pin location. It's also easier than today. I don't know. Maybe we're on to something. Maybe it's not going to be quite the hard Sunday setup that we always see there. 16's on this very middle right. They likely move it back to the full tipped out tee box. I mentioned that they were going to move the tee box over here most likely, and that's exactly what they did. More than likely, though, they move back to the full tipped out yardage over here, which will play like 230 yards towards the middle right. So scoring average will probably stay about the same, even though the pin location isn't as difficult. And that's just because of the tee box being a little bit further away. Let's go to 17 next. 17 is a front left pin. This is the one, by the way, that I thought was in the front middle that we were looking at before. Not sure why I confused those. Low spot on the left, though, does help you hit it close if you can execute your iron shot, but it adds some difficulty for getting up and down. So I don't think the scoring average is going to change that much at 17, as opposed to, I do think you may see a higher birdie average and a higher bogey average, though, at that hole. So just a little bit of a different dynamic. And then finally, 18 is a front left pin location. This is the hardest pin that you have at 18. And actually, I shouldn't even say the hardest. It's kind of like last hole at 17. This is the most volatile pin that you have at 18. You've got a little bowl effect, which means that if you execute a perfect long iron, you could conceivably hit it close and get that little backstop to put it back to like 5 to 10 feet. And if you're hitting a wedge in too, you can also use that sloping to your advantage. But what it does bring into play is this left miss, which is a very difficult up and down for birdie. And then it also brings this water into play because this shaved off fairway area, you can spin balls back off into the water. And obviously, if you mishit your long iron shot or your free wood into this green, you can end up in that water as well. So I think you're going to see the birdie average maybe go slightly up at 18, but also the bogey average go up at the same time. So to go back to what we were going through before in the averages and whatnot, I think that these are going to be very similar across the 2 days. I don't think the birdie average is going to go up or down very much. I think the stroke average might be closer to even par. So maybe rather than a half a stroke over par, we adjust that to closer to an even par scoring average. Bogey or worse average, maybe it goes up to like 3.2 per round, like 3.25, as opposed to like 3.5 bogeys or worse per round. It was good that we went through that pin setup because there are a few pin locations on here that are not the typical Sunday setup. And I guess just to point out a few of those, like 7's normally in the back right corner, like what it was for today. 5 is normally in the very back right corner of that green. At least when it's at the US Open, it's definitely going to be back in that back right corner for that kind of a major championship setup. 6 even, a lot of times 6 is in the back left corner for Sunday as opposed to what it was for today. So that's why I don't think it's going to be as hard as some of these Sunday pin setups could be. So to get back to what we were looking at on the board, I still like the fade slip, by the way. I like it for 2.8x a little bit more if we can find these two on better. I have a sneaking suspicion that they might not both be available on better, though. So that's the one hurdle that we might have to get over. But if there are some decent players at 3.5 birdies now, I know somebody asked about Matty Schmid before. I'd prefer somebody that's a little bit better than Matty Schmid personally. I'm not necessarily against that sort of a thing. So like Max McGreevy has been playing some pretty good golf. I'm not exactly sure where he rates out on the birdie or better list, but maybe he could be one of those players. Let's not even guess. Let's just take a look at what we had from last year. So got it on 2025. Let's see what we have. So I'm going to actually research a couple of them. Jaeger, I want to see where Jaeger was. McGreevy was the other one. And then you can look at Ventura too. Why not? So McGreevy is number 47. So that's probably going to be the best out of all these that we go through. Ventura was 44 as well. So he was also up there. And then what was Jaeger was the other one I wanted to go through. And Jaeger was also 53. So also pretty close towards the top end of that list. Let's see what the sportsbook odds look on those as well. So Jaeger is minus 124 towards the over. I guess it makes sense, but we could do a little bit better than that. We could even look at Novak too. I don't think that's a terrible one. But yeah, let's look at the Ventura and McGreevy odds. The McGreevy one's the one that I feel the best about, if I had to say so. Ventura is about even money at that mark. Let's look at McGreevy and what he's actually juiced towards the under at minus 130. It's wild how that works out, right? Like I thought McGreevy would have by far the best odds out of any of those players that we're going through. And it ends up turning out that he has the worst odds out of all three of those. So maybe that means that there's some value that we could take on that if we can get a multiplier on underdog or something in that direction. But I think this board is decently priced now that we've seen some of those pin locations. I thought it was way too optimistic when I first went through the board. Now I don't think it's nearly as off as what I saw when we first got on here. So it might not be a massive exposure day for me. I might keep it relatively light with what I end up entering. We'll see what we can find on better, especially with the payouts being better over there. Not to throw the pun, but that's going to be huge for trying to figure out what we're going to go with. I'm just looking back at some of these strokes lines to see if there was anything that was obvious value towards the underside. Now that we're looking at the course not being as hard as what I thought. Like the Haltong Lee, we had the question about that at 72 strokes. If I think the scoring average is going to be about even par now, that's the kind of adjustment that we can make. Asking him to have an average or better day is within reason now. Like now I wouldn't give you any pushback at all. If you're looking for that kind of an under, I would with Joel Damon because of the way that he played in round number 3. But that ball striking consistency that Haltong has showed us all week is, I think, maybe worthy of playing. And you can see on here, Joel Damon's actually at 72.5 now. So he may have bumped in the other direction. But let's see. Any other obvious unders that could at least throw out there? I don't know. I think I like what we've pointed out already. I'm going to have to do some more modeling and deep diving after we get off here to see exactly what I end up entering. I kind of want to look at Denny and his stats. Let's look at Denny's birdie or better percentage. Just go back to that. Not a good year for him in the birdie or better percentage department. But let me see what his odds are. So he was minus 122 for the over on birdies. What's his strokes line? Probably doesn't have a stroke line. Yeah, nothing from that department. I mean, he's just a better golfer than some of the other guys on here that they have at 71.5. So that's why I wanted to deep dive that. And if memory serves me correctly, one of the better ball striking days today as well, and lost in the 2 short game categories. I don't know if I love taking guys to shoot under par at Torrey Pines. It's just it's not the kind of golf course that you want to be taking guys to shoot under par at. But if I was going to do it with anyone, it'd be somebody that's hitting the ball well, like you had on a Denny McCarthy there, and somebody that's a pretty damn course fit as well. But that's what we'll say for the underdog and the price pick side. We give you guys that one slip to tail yourself. Is I would say be careful with the slate. Like, I don't think it's one to just nuke a whole bunch of slips. I think you got to be pretty intentional and pretty careful about the guys that you're taking. Like, looking at this Tony Finau one, 72 strokes feels pretty fair for an under. Like, there are some pieces of value in either direction that I think make a lot of sense on here. So just do your due diligence. If you guys want to see every single prop that I'm playing for Sunday, it won't just be that 2-man that I'm entering. It'll be at least a slip or 2 more than I enter on there tonight. You guys can find that on my Patreon page. The golf prop and betting tier is how you guys get access to everything that I'm entering, whether it's on the pick'em sites or with any matchup bets that I'm entering as well. But speaking of, let's go through the matchup board that we have for Sunday. And Hard Rock Bet, I actually want to bring up Hard Rock Bet to see if they have anything posted. They normally take forever to get their board up. So I'm not counting on them having anything for us to go through on there together. If not, we're going to go through DraftKings and just their scoring, which isn't always the exact same as what we have on Hard Rock Bet, but it is pretty similar, at least within 20 to 30 points on a lot of those bets. And yeah, nothing has been posted on Hard Rock Bet yet. They have these full tournament matchups, the 4 of them that are still live on there, but nothing other than that. So we're going to have to go through DraftKings and the odds there instead. And because I'm down in Florida, that's why we look at Hard Rock Bet. That's the only sports book that I have access to down here. But I post all the props and some of the odds that you can get on other sports books too. So even if you don't have access to Hard Rock Bet, a lot of the exposure will be available on sites like Draftkings and Fanduel here. But let's go through the three balls and see if there's anything that is obvious value. And I'm normally looking at long shots. If you guys saw yesterday's live stream, you'd know that it's normally like the plus 200s or more that I'm targeting for this sort of a format. Denny McCarthy at plus 175, though. I'm at least going to throw that in the shopping cart. Maybe the prop side isn't the best way to get our exposure. Maybe it's better to go in this three ball format where he's the best course fit out of that group. Taylor Moore's a very inconsistent player. And even in these three balls, I know I said it on the head-to-heads before where you want the consistent guys, the guys that can shoot -1, -2 for these head-to-head formats. It's kind of the same thing for the three balls. You still want the more consistent players from that format, which is why Denny might even be value at that plus 175. But let's continue to go through this list and see if there's anything else that stands out. You got J-Day, Nico Højgaard, and then Tony Finau at plus 255. It didn't work out for us today. He ran into the Keith Mitchell buzzsaw at our plus 235 or whatever the number was we got. I think it was plus 240 actually that we were able to get on Hard Rock Bet. Plus 255 though is tempting again because it's the course history on Finau that you like. If you guys haven't seen the course history on Tony Finau before, just look up the Farmers Insurance Open and then Tony Finau on any database. Top 25 all but 2 years at this golf course. It's if you can find better course history for another player at any golf course, I would be rather impressed if you could pull that off. So I'm going to keep him in there at plus 255. Might even bet that myself if we can find the same or even a better number. We got a Gim versus an Eckroat and a Ryder. Ryder's another good course history guy. He's the most inconsistent out of those three golfers, but Gim and Eckroat aren't like murderer's row like you're worried about kind of players. So I don't know if plus 205 is good enough. I would probably want closer to plus 220 to bet that, but maybe being a little bit disrespected with how he's played at the South Course over the years. One of the best track records at this golf tournament over the last 5 seasons. We got Goddard versus Thor and Daniel Brown. Brown plus 280 is a big number, but he's going against Goddard and Thor, who are 2 of my top 5 players of the guys that made the cut. Got a Rogers, an RNP, also a Zach Bachow. Still got to figure out how you say that last name. That's a confusing one for me. You got a Cootie versus McCarty and an Eric Cole. Eric Cole's shots gained metrics could have been a little bit better, but that's, probably going to skip that one. You got Castillo versus Ryan and Ewert. Keith, not going to run back to him, especially after how short game dependent he was, but he's going against a Ventura and a Shank. Shank is still punned with one hand, if you guys haven't seen it, by the way. So I'm not going to put any hard-earned money on Adam Shank unless it's in DFS, a volatile format. I used him today, and it worked out. He shot -4. I had one of the better scores in some of my top-end lineups, but seeing him putt with one hand on the broadcast is just a really ugly sight, and it makes it hard to believe that he's going to putt well in back-to-back days with that kind of form. Then you got a Hoey versus a Grillo and a Hubbard there. I got to say, I hate these three balls. Like my favorite, maybe I'm just spoiled by the kind of odds that I'm getting on Hard Rock Bet, but when Hard Rock Bet drops the head-to-head odds, and they're just way different than some of the odds you can find on DraftKings and FanDuel, it's like the easiest pickings imaginable with going out there and finding value. So I'm going to throw out these as maybe half-unit plays that you can mix in, but a lot of my head-to-head exposure, a lot of my betting exposure on the sports books, I'm going to have to save for Hard Rock Bet later on because I don't like forcing in exposure kind of just for the sake of it. And after going through these matchups, at least the three balls, I didn't see anything that was obvious value. So for the rest of the betting exposure that I'm entering for round 4, you guys can find that on the Patreon page as well. But unfortunately, Hard Rock Bet just likes to take their sweet old time when getting up with these boards. And I don't like live streaming at like 1 or 2 a.m. So it's just kind of is what it is. It's unfortunate. I wish I could bring you guys all that content here live, but we've got to deal with the kind of cards that we're being dealt here with this live stream. But that's all I've got, guys. I appreciate your support on the channel as per usual. If you haven't already smashed that like button, go ahead and do so. Let's pump up those numbers, get this content out there to even more people. And also make sure you subscribe to the channel so you guys don't miss any of the content to come. That will include all of the content throughout the rest of the season. We're going to have Showdown live streams for rounds 2 through 4, prop live streams like you guys saw here as well. And if you guys didn't see my content for this week, excuse me, the throat is definitely hurting me a little bit right now. But if you didn't see my content earlier this week as well, I do DFS breakdowns. I do live streams for going into round number 1 as well. Make sure you subscribe so you guys don't miss any of that on top of that. But that's all I've got, guys. I hope to see you guys at the top end of those leaderboards. Let's cash out on the props as well. And let's have ourselves a spike day, right? It's kind of just like about neutral for a lot of the beginning of this week. I'd like to have GPP takedown, maybe cash out on like 3 or 4 of our slips for tomorrow. That'd be a good way to cap off this week. But that's all I've got. As I said before, let's see. Any last second questions? I love Torrey too. One of the best courses on tour. You're looking at an Eric Cole or Keith Mitchell top 15. They're not my favorite plays because of their shots gained metrics, but I love Eric Cole. Keith is maybe my top 50 favorite players in the world. So yeah, I'd maybe go Eric Cole rather than a Keith Mitchell just because of what we saw today. It's good stuff. Thanks for the info. Thank you guys for being awesome in the chats. Golf 101, but it seems to be if you're off the tee successfully, your chances to gain are tremendously greater at birdie or better. So maybe some overs for guys that have been better off the tee this week. Yeah, I agree with you on that, man. And it's because of the par fives too. Anytime you have 4 par fives to attack at a long course and they're like 600 yards, the power players are going to be better for birdies or better. So totally with you on that. And that's why guys like a Pavon, a Hughes, for example, that aren't the bombers off the tee are usually at the bottom end of that list by the end of the year. So not a lot of green to work with for a bunch of those front flags. Totally with you on that. That's like even one, I think was the best example of that. If you're coming out of the rough at one, it's going to be a hard ass hole. Like if you hit the fairway, it's going to play half a stroke under par. You miss the fairway, it's going to play a half a stroke over. So I like that. I like that because it leads to separation. Like the guys that play well are going to score. The guys that don't play well are going to shoot over par. That's the way that they should be setting up courses, in my opinion. Looking at McGreevy at 3.5 birdies is juiced towards the under on underdog. Yeah, so if you're going to take the over, I mentioned like you wouldn't want to do it for the 50-50 on like a prize picks. You'd want to do it like maybe at the plus 100 on a sports book. But the other way to go about it would be to do it on a site like Underdog, like you mentioned, where you're getting a multiplier. And what's the multiplier? It's 1.07x. That's pretty tempting. You know, I'm going to have to deep dive that after we get off the live stream here, but I think that might be something to enter myself. Good call, man. Is it DraftKings has lines for players for birdie or better, par, bogey, or worse for holes 1 through 3 and 12 through 10? Anything stand out after seeing the pins? Yeah, I'm not going to go through like the odds and the players, but I'll give you my general thoughts on those holes. So I think the first 3 holes, you could see 2 birdies or better from single players. So I'm not sure whether those odds are going to be for groups or it's for individual holes on those players. Hole 3 is going to be, I think, the one where you see like a 30% birdie rate. It's a wedge into a front left pin, which is pretty receptive as well. Hole 1, if you hit the fairway, you're going to see a really high birdie rate there too. So if you can live bet birdies are better on 1 for guys that hit the fairway, I would do that. But I have a feeling that that's not going to be something that you could do. But hole 3 might just be the hole to go out there and hammer some birdie or better bets. But let's start at 10 through 12, you said as well. 10's hard, 11's really hard. 12 too is an extremely difficult hole. The odds are going to be a lot different on those holes compared to 1 through 3 though. So yeah, look at 1 through 3, see if any of them are attractive from the birdie or better standpoint. Even 2, you could see some birdies. You've got some room to get it close, but the putts at 2 are going to be very hard to hole. Like if you see your guy with a 6-footer above the hole at hole number 2, it's going to be like a 30% make rate at the very most. So yeah, hopefully that helps you out. And if you're on the Patreon page, Chris, feel free to throw any questions my way over on that end. But that's all I've got, guys. I appreciate your support here on the channel as per usual. I'll see you guys for all the content next week, and let's finish this week strong.